She has it going on, and so I just wanted to, start off by saying that I'm Carmen Rios. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a self-proclaimed feminist superstar. Thank you very much. And the editorial director here at Jane. And so I'm going to start today's conversation by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which I am on in Los Angeles, California, the Tongva tribe, their elders past and present. And as we gather in a connected community online, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands of North, Central, and South America, the indigenous peoples and their elders past and present. And we acknowledge that this naming is not enough for the justice that we seek to realize for indigenous people. So with this acknowledgement, I also ask, what responsibilities and commitments can we make to foster more honest and generative relations with this land and each other? And can we, wherever we go, acknowledge indigenous claims to the land we occupy? I also want to name that today, my highest intention is that our words and our language here do not cause harm to anyone who's joining or to each other. I will be holding that intention throughout the conversation and will stand in the feedback if I fall short. If part of today's program is interactive, feel free to decline to participate. No is a complete sentence. It is okay if your camera is off. And on another housekeeping note, I am recording this session, but we ask that everyone else does not record it and that it is only viewed internally. I will totally ask your questions to Sophie later on. So feel free throughout to post questions in the chat, and then I'll scroll through and pick some out. And so much of what we talk about at the Jane Club is honoring the work of women, all the paid and unpaid labor that women do, how undervalued women's time is. And so taking time right now to share with our community is no small feat. So I am honored that Sophie Santos is here with us. Sophie is a comedian and writer, the host of the critically acclaimed satirical comedy show, The Lesbian Agenda. You can also hear her in the new Audible original Hit Job alongside Pete Davidson, and this summer as Emily in Hot White Heist, directed by Alan Cumming. Very excited. And today we're going to talk about her new memoir, The One You Want to Marry and Other Identities I've Had, which is out now. And now I get to say, welcome, Sophie.
Thank you so much. I do need to change my bio because it is fully not summer anymore. So you can now hear me.
I was like, am I early? Am I late?
No, it's just very funny. I'm like, oh, wow. It's also because like time has been passing so fast, but thank you for, all of that. And it's really, really nice to meet you. And I'm really excited that you invited me to chat. This is going to be fun.
Yes, it is. And, I truly loved the book. And, it's really struck me that it's a memoir about, coming of age, coming out, your journey coming to comedy, other less appropriate types of coming. And I'm just wondering how you came to the project, like what really made you decide to write a memoir, and specifically to basically write a memoir that is putting so much of your life, going back so far, going so deep, and putting it on the page.
Well, I'm so happy that you enjoyed it. It always feels good to hear that. And glad that it resonated. Yeah, you know what? I was not really planning to write a book. I was, I'm a comedian. I've written for TV shows. I've, done sketch comedy, but I was, as far as the narrative space, it's not something that I had really explored. And I was actually doing a comedy show. And at the comedy show, an editor was there and happened to see my work and was just like, I really like your stuff. Do you want to write? If you ever want to write a book, call me. And it was one of those moments that I was like, this is hilarious and is never going to happen. But I'm glad that I'm getting to experience a moment like this. But this is in my mind, I'm like, but this is where this ends. And I shook her hand and I was like, yeah, sounds great. And I like kind of sat on the card for about a month, and then I was like, well, I can't really lose anything by emailing. And at the time, someone who was really close to me was like, yeah, but you're not gonna like write a book. And they weren't being like mean. They were just kind of like, Sophie, like, what? This is not really your space. And I was like, yeah, but I could spin it. We could spin something here. And and so I just emailed the editor and was like, I mean, if I look back at this email, I'm sure it's like, hi, I'm Sophie Santos. I'm based in Bushwick, and I am really good at sketch comedy. And but she sat down with me. We had a really nice lunch. Actually, the nicest lunch I think I've ever had and will ever have. I remember at the time too, I was fully now I still am into thrift shopping, but way more than I am now. And so I had like this big thrift shop coat on, and I fully had the French man, the host, check it for me, feeling which like he should have just kept it or thrown it out because it was not. So it was like two worlds colliding. And we had a really good lunch, and honestly, like, it just, yeah, I went from there. And just say that like immediately I got it, it's absolutely not. I had to send in samples. I had to, now decide what the book would look like, and it took about 6 months, and then it happened. And then it took me 2 years. It took me 2 years to write it.
And, I feel like you take us in this memoir. It's like it's a new format for you. And it also feels like it has these like thorny, ugly, hard, uncomfortable things in it too. Like it feels like that must have been maybe new terrain for you to sort of write really seriously about some of the stuff that you've been through in your life. And so I'm just curious, like, what did it feel like to navigate that as a comedian? And, how did it sort of impact and reverberate for you?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely, at first I thought I was going to be doing a collection of essays, which again, no shade, some of my favorite books are by essayists, and then that's also kind of what I grew up on. That's what I was reading from comedians, and then in my peers who would release books and stuff. And so I was like really kind of, I was like, oh, I can definitely, I can do that. That seems to be the route. And they were like, no, we really want this to be a memoir because we really want it to be linear. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. They're like, we really want you to go there. And I was like, okay, that's also an interesting point. That's just an interesting point. They're like, so it's not going to just be jokes. Like, you're really going to have to be vulnerable. And, it took a second for me to kind of really be vulnerable. But once I started, then it just, then it became easier. And obviously I'm so happy that I did. And, but, they had to twist my arm a little bit to make me there, because they were like, you can't, because the first thing that I sent them was absolute shit. Like, it was horrible. It was so bad. It was so bad. In addition to it being so bad, one of my editors goes, Sophie, do you have Word? And I said, like the program? And she was like, yeah, yes. And I said, well, because I just been sending Google Docs. So, I'm sorry, everyone. Everyone's gonna be like, wow, she's a fraud. She shouldn't be here. We hate her. Oh my God, why did we invite her to this fireside chat? But they were like, we can help you get Word. And I was like, no, I can get Word. I'll get Word. Like, because it's gonna be a very long document. So I was more just concerned of trying to make sure I was formatting it correctly. And my original word count was 75,000, which is about like 250. And then, as we know, I actually wrote over that. And because I guess I had a lot to say, but yeah.
And like, what does it feel like now that it's out? Like, after you were like challenging yourself to be vulnerable, what's that response been like? Like, is it having sort of the impact you were hoping it would have?
Oh yeah, I mean, it totally. And when I first started this process, one of my editors was like, think about the one thing that you don't want to tell anybody, and then tell everybody. And at the time, again, because I was, my little comedy shield that I had put up in front of, just to deflect, I was just like, okay, yeah, sure. And I thought of it, I knew exactly what it was. And I was like, well, it's great that you think that, but I'm not going to write that, in my mind. I wasn't to her. I was just like, oh yeah, I'll think about it. In my mind, I'm like, no, lock the gates. I'm gonna close the door, run. There's like sirens going off. And we were, I guess it was like a year and a half, and the book was like, there's always so many drafts. So I think like I was on like finally like my fourth draft, which was like, we're almost there. It's almost being sent to the public, to where they print it. And the story had been weighing on me for the whole duration of the process. And I was like, if I don't write about this, it's going to be doing a disservice to me. It's going to be a disservice to the readers, because I can't sit here and just act like my life was just all, rainbows and sprinkles. And I know it's not like that in general, but it's just like, as far as in my adulthood, like I didn't want to paint myself as just this perfect person, and I already hadn't. So I really needed to go there. And so that chapter, I titled it, and it's the same chapter. It's titled the same thing, and it's literally called "This is the Shit I Didn't Want to Write." And in like one fell swoop, I just like typed it up, and then I just like closed my eyes and sent it. And I was like, wow, they're going to cancel the book. This is it. This is the end of my career. And then they loved it, and it was actually and now it's probably one of my favorite chapters. And when I get a lot of comments, people have been reaching out to me about the book. That's one of the things that they say that they like the most, that I really talked about not being such a great person, and I'm really glad that I did that.
Yeah. And I mean, it seems like that is sort of a perfect anecdote too, because so much of the book, like by the end, I felt like the book was so powerfully exploring the ways that authenticity fuels art, right? This sort of way in which you finally come into your identity as a queer woman, and then it's like you discover comedy, and the comedy career starts taking up. And I know that like it probably wasn't like, and I came out and then the next day this happened, blah blah blah, but it's like this idea of, by stepping into ourselves, we can unlock like the real power and find the life that we didn't even realize we were looking for and meant for. And so I have sort of a two-part question.
Yeah.
And my first is being gay an actual superpower? For this question, a simple yes or no answer will suffice. And then just on a more serious note, like so much of the book is about being a shapeshifter, right? Like surviving by being a chameleon. And so how did you come to like know yourself and find your voice in a world that is totally not built to make space for like the totality of who you are?
Yeah, so yeah, for sure. I think being gay is a superhero. And it's insane that Marvel hasn't figured that out yet. We are working on it with the lesbian agenda, so don't you worry, like it is happening. So you will see some sort of, there are queer superheroes that are happening, but like as far as like, the queer Thor, the lesbian Thor, whatever, the gay Thor, gay Thor would be hot. I think that'd be actually very fun, and would sell out. But he's kind of gay, anyway, that's he's a little gay. I feel like he's like for sure bi. There's something going on. But now so yes. And then as far as being a shapeshifter, sound off in the comments if you think Thor is bi. And what makes you think that?
Superman is bi now. That is true. That happened.
Oh yeah, that's good. That actually does make sense. That's the
one you're like, I should have known, right?
Yeah, we all should have known that. But yeah, so as far as being a shapeshifter and like figuring it out and finally like coming into my own, I mean, it's probably why the book is so long, is because it is such a long story. But I guess the shortest version of that is, I think it's just because I tried on so many identities and was like really going for it, like fully committing to being a sorority girl, fully committing to being a Republican at one point, a McCain Republican. Okay. I know it's not better, but we're talking 2009. I was 18. I think like fully committing to, just kind of all these different environments, and then realizing it's almost like mentally I was being like, nope, 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 definitely not that one. And so when shit hit the fan, and a lot of it did, the catalyst, I guess, was when I was at Alabama, there was a tornado that tore through the school, and killed a bunch of people and was just really devastating. And that really, like, my anxiety, which I talk a lot about mental health, especially like, from an early age, and um, having anxiety since I was like 6. And so but not ever realizing it. So when that kind of all, when the boom happened on campus, like the boom inside of me happened. And that really kind of, when you're kind of in that sort of situation where it's like a life or death situation, you kind of go, what do I want to do? What do I actually want to do? And I got help, and was in like intense therapy. And that really was the sort of catalyst that set me off, and helped me discover, that I don't like wearing dresses and heels to football games and stand. I love football games, but I don't want to stand in a dress and heels in the bleachers next to a frat bro.
Understandable. Is this where I'm supposed to say roll tide? Is this where it would be?
Yeah, roll tide.
Roll tide.
Roll tide.
And like, I love that you sort of brought up that moment from the book too, because it reminded me of like the Wizard of Oz being this recurring image in the book, and which I feel like is so appropriate, right? This idea of like a girl from anywhere thrown into like a world she longed for, but didn't know how to navigate, feeling like an other and finding her way. Like, what advice, having walked this long, winding, sometimes messy path, what advice would you have for other folks who like feel like the other and want to forge their own path, in a way that honors who they really are?
Oh, I mean, I guess don't put so much pressure on yourself, because like, you know, it's hard. It's hard to figure it out. And sometimes it takes, I mean, for me, I've started really figuring it out when I was in my early 20s, but sometimes it's not that easy. And sometimes people will be younger, and sometimes people might be in their 40s or 50s. And so I just think that, like, my thing is, and this is how I sort of live my life, uh, as far as creatively, as far as like as a career person, you know, uh, and obviously as far as identity as well, up until a certain point, it's just like throwing shit against a wall and seeing what's gonna stick, you know. Uh, and a lot of times it takes a lot of tries, but eventually, hopefully, something does land, and it will, and it always will. Something will always land that you resonate with, and then keep following that.
And, we have a lot of writers, funny ladies, creative types here at Jane, I'm sure watching right now and watching later on demand. And so, you're out here producing a live show, writing for TV shows, releasing a book. How do you get it all done? What does your creative process look like?
There's a lot. I just watch a lot of TV. I watch a lot of reality TV. I procrastinate so much. I'm such a typical writer where I'm just like I had something due on the 12th, which was a couple days ago. And deadlines are good for me. I will always make a deadline. You give me a deadline, I'm your girl. I got it. It will be in by the deadline. But if I have 2 weeks, I'm probably not going to write it until 3 days before, you know? I don't know. I guess my process, it's all, I don't even know. I don't know how to explain it. I guess it's just, staying organized. I was obviously, like, someone just said hashtag relatable. Yes. Thank you. And I'm thanking you because I'm glad I'm relating to you too. So, um, yeah, I mean, I guess sticking to a deadline is really important. Once you don't do that, that's where it gets messy. For a long time though, I was organized chaos. So I like didn't have a calendar. I just was like I just had like memorized things. And then I don't know if Brittany's
I'm
still on.
just, I'm like really, I'm reeling inside from the idea of this. So I'm
Yeah.
just coping over here.
I don't know if Brittany's still on, who's my publicist, but it really wasn't until she came on board that and they got me a calendar that I was like, oh, I might need to use a calendar. She says, I'm here. Yeah. So I got a calendar literally this year, 3 months ago. And then started putting in, but mainly what I was actually doing, I don't know if anyone can relate to this, is I was using notes, the notes app. And so I would like write my schedule in that. And I'm like, okay, 10 to 10:30, coffee, 10:30 to 11, try to get food, 11 to 12, write this thing, and that's how I live my life. Don't do it. It's insane. It's insane. But it got me this far. So, but now I use called Tiny Calendar. Tiny Calendar syncs Apple, Google, whatever you want. That's how I live my life, and that's how I get through
And I
it.
mean, if like so much of the work you do, right, is about like writing this new narrative and making queer women and people of color visible in a way that is like removed from all of this bad shit in the world, right? The male gaze, shame, hate, stereotypes, tropes. And so, how do you sort of fiercely guard that mission within this entertainment industry? Like, I know you have a story in the book about calling someone out that you were working with on a TV show about like a certain scene and the representation in that scene. Like, I'm
Yeah.
curious, sort of how you navigate trying to do this kind of more radical work and flip this script when we live in a culture where, that is still sort of considered super subversive, that you might actually like, I don't know, see people like you as human beings. That might be like a crazy thought for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because like I mean, I don't think of myself as super super radical, even though I know that like I'm sure what I'm doing probably would be you consider it radical, and so I'm sure that it is. But I've always just kind of gone at it just with like, you know, I don't know. I mean, the situation you're specifically talking about is when I was working on Blind Date, and which was the reboot, by the way. If you know if you remember that TV show that came out with Roger Lodge years ago. And yeah, and one of the people, basically the premise is like people go on blind dates, and it's all silly. It's like reality television, but then they get a writer's room to like make jokes and thought bubbles for the around the date. So it's almost like you're watching a date through a Snapchat filter or an Instagram filter. Um, and one of the writers had a lesbian date, which I actually wasn't upset about. I mean, there was a part of me that wanted to do it, but then I was also like, oh, cool, great. Like we're not being, they don't just have, they had me because of diversity, but then when it came down to it, it was kind of, there was a part of me that felt kind of like, oh, great, they're not just giving me just the lesbian dates or the queer dates, because that's also annoying too. So I was like, sure, I'll work on whatever. But then when we all watched it down together, the writer, who is a straight white guy and also older, um was not being an ageist. It's just like, he definitely was of a different generation. And the two women were kissing in a hot tub, and they were like so cute together, and it was like all fun and silly, and like right when they kiss, there was a frog that jumped out and was like, kiss her. Like, oh god, here we go. Oh, this is what they talk about. Because I hadn't experienced any of it yet. Because I've always been surrounded myself with, like, even if I am hanging out with straight white dudes, they've always been, pretty, very inclusive and just like with it. And so to be around someone who wasn't with it was like actually jarring for me. And then of course it kept going, and then he literally, the frog said, no, keep going. And that really kind of fucked me up, because I was like, how is this a thing? Right? Like that's me being naive, because I just expected, I thought we had moved the needle, at least on that, right? Like the whole point of the reboot was to make it more queer and diverse and inclusive. And here we are, we're like, we have queer and diverse, but we're just like but we're making fun of them in a way that's harmful. And I was really nervous because our showrunner had been fired. And so we had just got a new showrunner. And it is like all, classic, like scared to go talk to your boss because you don't want to get fired. And so I was like kind of freaking out. And on my last day, I went into the office, and I talked to the showrunner, and I just basically just said, hey, like, I tried to like frame it in a way where he could understand. And I was just like, the date, I can't remember what the two women's name were, but I was just like, let's just say like Gina and Dara, the Gina and Dara date, I just kind of had some issues with, mainly just because like, there's a frog that's telling them to kiss. And when that happens, it's basically is treating this queer relationship like it's not real, and it's for the male gaze, and it's for it's for men. And he literally got up immediately and was just like, oh my God, you're so right, and was like, I'm gonna fix this right now. And he was like, I wouldn't have even thought of that, which, like, I'm not gonna bash him because, yeah, should he have considered that? Should it be obvious at this point that like two women dating are not, it has nothing to do with, a guy, and also has nothing to do, like, we're not for your pleasure. Should that be obvious at this point? Of course. But because it was a learning moment for him, it's like, I'm not gonna, and he was changing it, and I wasn't gonna like, and be like, and while we're at it, you should know. But long-winded story, this is a long-winded, section for me to say, it's like, I'm really glad that I said something, because if that would have made it on TV and I didn't, I would have always been kicking myself. And it changed one person, at least it changed one person's mind, who is a pretty big heavyweight in the industry. And actually the next year he asked me to be back on the job and I was one of the only writers hired back. And he said, because because of that reason, he was like, I'm so happy that you stood up for that. And I'm just an old white guy, and I want to have more, we need to have more people like you in the room. And I didn't even think he would remember. And now he's a good friend of mine. So I guess that is radical in itself. But and the thing that I also told him, I said, if that gets passed around on Twitter, it's not gonna be a good look for the show. So I also had to, and he was like, that was kind of the final, like, oh my God, yeah, you're so right, So I guess, I guess with a show called The Lesbian Agenda, sure, it's a radical thing, but I always come at it with like a super positive mentality. And I think maybe that's where, it's almost like I'm like sneakily radical. They don't even know I'm doing it. They have no idea. No one has no idea, but it's like things are happening.
You make it so funny that they can't even tell what's happening.
Oh, thank you. Yes. And so nice and casual and relatable.
And I mean, it's funny because you write in like an author's letter at the top of the book, how you wrote the book that you wish you had had when you were growing up. And I mean, it was really interesting for me to read your story because, like, I am also mixed race, late bloomer. I mean, I feel like coming out in your 20s really shouldn't count as being a late bloomer, but like it does, because that's just the time we live in. And, also came from like being raised by a single mom. Like, I just felt like there were so many parallels, and it made me think about, that's also a big part of the work that I do, is I'm like, I want to tell the stories that like I didn't have, that I really wish I had had. And so, there's been this sort of proliferation of queer content over the last couple of years. It's been really spectacular to watch. But what are you still kind of hungry for and working to create? Like, what kind of representation do you still wish there was more of?
Well, there's a show, a little show on Netflix called Call My Agent, which I don't know if we have any Call My Agent friends of the show. It's a French show, and I'm waiting for the comments to pop off um, about this French show.
And I'm
But
like, I see some people reacting. I know I have seen many a Slack conversation about the show called My Agent.
okay, good. So it's such a great show, and it's a great show because the lead is a lesbian, but they don't and wardrobe. I mean, my God. I mean, everyone's hot. Well, that's actually not true. Just Cami actually just Andrea, just Cami Cotin is hot. But well, no, and all the actresses everyone's good looking. Just not all the agents. Just one. You should use this as a soundbite. Me stumbling over people being hot. But I just want more hot people on TV. Let's move the
representation I'm hungry for is hotter.
It's just more hot people. No, what they do really well is that it centers around, the whole premise is basically about these agents, and each episode they're dealing with, putting out fires with their actors and actresses, but the main agent is a lesbian, and when the moment you're dropped into the world, she just is gay. I knew it from the moment she opened her mouth, but also like she doesn't come out, she never comes out. She just gets to exist and be a flawed person and deal with things like a person. And I think we're still seeing, as much as we're seeing a lot of queer content, and I'm talking more so from like queer women, but even men as well. Like it's still the coming out trope, and it's so weird for me to say this as I wrote a coming of age and coming out story. But as far as like on TV, but I think it's more than that. But like as far as like on TV, I don't need another coming out monologue. I just don't need it. Like I just want to see someone just existing and being gay, and living their life, because being gay is not the most interesting thing about, at least in my opinion, about me or about any of these other people. And it's fun to see them go on their gay shenanigans. It's fun to see Andrea be this like womanizer, but then also she falls on her face for being a womanizer. That's fun. But the French are on it, and they know what they're doing, and so we need to follow their lead. And so I personally am now working on a show where it does center a queer woman, but it's not, but she just is gay, and but it's just part of it. That's it. So that's what I want.
And well, something else too that I just, as an aside, that I appreciated about your particular coming out story and like this story that you tell is that, there's also, I feel like that coming out trope is like, it's always like, oh, it's really hard because everyone around me has never been accepting, and it's always been clear that this is going to be unacceptable. And I'm like worried that people will hate me, or like my family will, kick me out. And I mean, these are obviously real concerns that happen in people's lives.
And they do happen.
I totally feel like, it's also so deeply like, and I knew for my whole life, like I've struggled with this my whole life. And I just really loved knowing that you and I also had this similar experience of like having a family that's like, hey, we have gay friends, gay people, like it's fine, whatever. And the struggle is so almost internal. Like it's so much about like shame and confusion and, just not really understanding what it'll mean for the rest of your life if you make this decision. And also, I think struggling with this idea of like being put in another box, which for you is something that you write about too in the book, is how your existence sort of defies these boxes that you're asked to fill in on a standardized test, and how that triggers this sort of like identity crisis for you in that moment. So yeah, I really appreciated that struggle. And, I'm interested sort of in how you think at the end of the day, not fitting into any of those boxes might have been your superpower.
Yeah, I mean, I guess by not fitting into any of these superpower boxes, it did fitting into all these boxes, ended up being my superpower. I guess it's just because I realized that I could have my own little box, you know. But but I was taking experiences from this box and this box and this box and kind of just like, almost like making my own potion of like, what is Sophie, you know? So I think that is kind of where the power comes from. It's not like I'm, just forging my own path and have the most unique journey. It's like I was heavily influenced by, you know, all these different surroundings, and my culture and living in the South and being a sorority girl and, and being a pageant queen, which is insane. But also, but doing it and then also just like, and then the failings, of me not being great to women when I first came out, and me thinking that I'm Shane from a TV show, which is a TV show. The L Word is a TV show, and it's like all of these things. And so that's all what made me who I am. And I'm still growing and changing. And I definitely feel like very firm and confident in who I am now. So that doesn't feel like, that feels firm. But, obviously as I get older and stuff, I'm sure I'll take even more experiences and add them to my little box.
Totally. And, what do you think is next for you now that the book is out? It doesn't inspire any anxiety at all when I ask you.
No, well, it can't because I'm on the highest dose of Lexapro right now. So honestly, whatever you say, it's in one. It can't do anything. Can't do anything. It's my shield. It's my Captain America shield. Which also he has to be gay. the tights. Yes, thank you. It is absurd that he is not gay. It is so absurd. That Chris Evans as Captain America 2 specifically. And they talk and Iron Man talks about his butt all the time. I'm just like, I just went on a whole like Marvel like rewatched the last like 6 movies. So it's been a journey. It's been like very fun. But what was the question? I'm sorry.
Oh my God. What's next for you? And also how it's humanly possible that Wonder Woman lives on an island where men don't exist, but somehow still just really wants to be with one. Like,
yeah.
What? I think about that on a daily basis as well.
Yeah, that makes no sense. What's next? I mean, it's a great question. I'm moving to LA in December, so very excited. That's going to be very fun. I'm just still doing the same thing that I was doing the whole time. I'm auditioning and writing, and I am trying to develop this TV show. And so that's what I'm kind of putting my main focus on right now. And just honestly, I think for the first time in my career, I'm like excited to step into the unknown. Like I have no idea what's going to happen. I have had no idea what's going to happen for this whole press situation. Like I didn't know what was going to happen, what was going to land, and amazing things did. And other cool things keep popping up. And so I'm just like, I'm literally just riding the wave, which I think is, for me, is a huge step because I'm so type A and I got to know what's next and I have to know what's coming next and I have to have the outcome right now. And now I'm just like, well, we're just going to see what's going to happen. While I continue to just, do my own work and so, yeah, I think it's a big we'll see, but I'm excited to see.
That's so wonderful. And yeah, I mean, that sounds perfect. I'm sure that whatever is ahead is wonderful and also hilarious. And so I definitely want to hold some time now for Q&A. If any folks have questions for Sophie, and I will give you a couple seconds to drop those questions in the chat while I remind everyone that we are having this one-day virtual writers retreat in case you are now inspired to write your own book or comedy show, because why wouldn't you be? And you can use this code, I'm a Jane, and get $15 off the tickets. I'm going to drop that in here so that I'm not dropping it at the outro when everyone is leaving. Except I'm almost leaving my scripted text in there, so let's not do that. I do not read all of my conversational chatter off of a document. So Maria wants to know,
Sure.
like whether your publisher wanted you to write the shorter book at 75,000 words, or if they wanted it to be like any specific length, sort of any, I guess, any insight into the publishing process, I think people would appreciate.
Yeah, so it had to be 75,000 words. I mean, I'm sure that if I was like 74,000, you know, or roughly around that, it would have been fine. But that was in the contract. That was the contract that we had. And I was really like nervous about meeting that. But then once I started mapping out my story and realizing like I need to be pretty descriptive, because you know, it's such a long and winding journey, especially because I moved around so much, especially, you know, and tracking that and tracking this and and then the mental health track, and then also the identity track. You know, there were just so many things that I really had to be specific about and layer. And by the time I got to like by the time I was like halfway through the book, well, I realized I had a third of the book to go. I had already surpassed my word count. And then I was like, oh no, how are we gonna wrap this up? Because there's so much more. Like I've been like building to the payoff, and I can't, you know. And so I just kept going and kept going and kept going. And then with my editor, we actually ended up taking off 100 pages.
Oh my God.
Even then, we still took out about 100 pages. And I was nervous, and I was like, should we try to cut it down another 50? And they were like, listen, at this point, it's really tight. So anything else that we take out, I think is going to start hindering it. And I agree. I think, you know, I mean, you could feel free to disagree with me, but I do think we trimmed the fat. And I think that it is, I think that it's still tight, regardless of it being a little bit longer. But yeah, I you know, it all comes down to contracts. And then I wouldn't be worried, and I shouldn't have been worried about hitting the word count, because it's not so much that I hit it, it's just that like just focus on the story that you want to tell, you know, and the words will, you know, they'll come, they'll land.
Totally. And I mean, I'm biased. This is a question that I just have, but like as someone who was working in what you called organized chaos, like what did those 2 years look like? Like how many drafts were there? Were you like holing up in a room and just writing for like 8 hours a day until you couldn't take it anymore? Like what did it look like writing this? Just for everyone who doesn't already have a copy of the book, I think it's like 470 something pages. So it's like, how did you actually write
No,
that?
no, it's 360. It's 360 pages, 360. Don't be scared. Please don't. I know I took off that 100. I took off that 100. Please don't be scared.
Oh, that makes sense.
No,
But yeah, like what did those 2 years look like for you? How did you put it all together in just 2 years? I feel like for me, I'm like, that is super impressive to me.
yeah, well, you're welcome, Maria, by the way. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it, you know, the editors like had like a schedule. And I mean, I had asked them for a schedule, because I was like, I work really well on deadlines. So I just need you to tell me like when the first draft is due. And then I think when we first started working together, it was like, why don't you get X amount of chapters in by this date? You know, it's almost like one day at a time, you know, sort of mentality. So it's like, okay, get these 3 chapters in. Could you get us 3 chapters in 2 weeks? Let's see what that feels like, you know, if I can remember correctly. And then from there, it just was like, especially once I started getting on a roll, you know, some weeks I would be able to bust out, you know, 10,000 words, 15,000 words. Some weeks I had nothing, because it's all also like trying not to force it. But I would say there were probably 4 drafts ultimately. Yeah, I think there were like 4 drafts. There was like the big draft, the first draft that I turned in. Then I got the biggest notes that I've ever gotten for the draft, and then the big second draft was when I was like really, really like making it close to what it should be, and then it was the third draft when it was finally like coming around, and then it was the fourth draft when I was like punching up, and I might have even got a fifth draft of just like punching up jokes or connecting dots of being like, hey, I talked about Dorothy here, so I need to make sure I bring her back here, and like almost like charting it out, which we lesbians, we know our charts. So
It's the only organizational system that we're actually very adept at, just universally, no matter what.
No matter what.
And I mean, Mary Kate is asking, do you think, having now tried your hand at all of these different formats, do you think you're going to want to publish more books and write more books? Or do you think that you're excited to sort of focus on performing, writing for TV moving forward?
I'd love to write another book. Absolutely. I think because mine was a memoir though, I kind of feel like, doing the Phoebe Waller-Bridge speech where she talks about Fleabag, and she's like, I'd love to see Fleabag when she's like, in her 60s or something. And I kind of feel the same way about this, where like, I mean, I definitely have ideas for other books that would just be its own thing. But as far as like, if I do another memoir, I'm going to have to like genuinely like live my life, and things are going to, and I don't think me kind of coming out with something in the next year or two would make sense. But I could be persuaded, and obviously like, doesn't mean I can't pivot to being an essayist. There were definitely stories that I left out that I'd love to include, big chunks actually that I didn't even talk about. So it's definitely possible, but I think at least in the immediate, as far as what I can see in the next 6 to 8 months, is me just focusing on now being a storyteller for TV, which is another way. I just really want to like move the needle for queer representation on TV as well, and that's a big thing for me.
Totally. And I mean, a question that I was sort of mulling over too is, I loved that throughout the book, when we see your mom, we see the book she's reading, and it always reveals, where she's at emotionally, what's going on in your family life. Like sometimes it's a foreshadowing. I just felt like it was so like well done that this was this motif of, she's like, the teenage girls in the White Lotus, like she's always got her book and it's always telling you something about her. And you talk about the L Word being basically like the only lesbian representation that was out there, besides, oh my God, I'm like already forgetting what it was, the other one.
Lip Service?
Yes, there we go. I'm like the other show that came out when, I feel like the L Word being the only lesbian representation that we have is an actual travesty and maybe a crime. But I'm just curious, like, what are the books that you were always reading? Like, what are the books that did sort of shape the storytelling that you do, that you turned to during this process, that inspired you? Like, who are the writers that you love? I'm just kind of curious. What are the books that for you like define this course of your life?
Yeah, I mean, it's so cliche to say this, but I mean, I devoured Bossy Pants by Tina Fey. I mean, I grew up watching SNL, and like that was a big book for me. And I really like read it a lot when I was writing my own book. Another book that I read a lot while I was writing my own book was Jesse Klein's You'll Grow Out of It. Who was a very talented writer, and used to write for Amy Schumer, is one of the main voices on Big Mouth. I think one of the writers on Big Mouth. And that was good. I mean, they all had different purposes, which I talk about. I got a really cool write up in Entertainment Weekly, and I talk about like what books served me how. And like Tina Fey like really showed me like what it's like to be super fucking funny. Jesse Klein showed me what it's like to be, a misfit and not fitting into the societal norms of femininity. And that was really helpful for me. Like David Sedaris helped me, realize that being Southern is actually cool as fuck. Samantha Irby, We Are Never Meeting in Real Life, like is one of the funniest people on the planet, and showed me also just like ways to write like that's not just that's not narrative, like the lists. I had like lists, and that was a big thing that she does. And I was like, oh, I really want to play with that format. So like not only just being funny, but like playing with format. Also her talking about queer sex is so important. And feeling liberated to talk about queer sex with her. Isaac Oliver's book uh, is Intimacy Idiot, who's now become a friend of mine. He talks about sex in the funniest way, but this whole book is about sex, and I love that. And him just trying to figure this whole, it's not him figuring out that he's gay. It's just him like trying to actually make connections. But it's hard for he's very hard. It's hard for him to be intimate, but it's totally fine for him to have sex. And so when he had this one, I don't know how graphic am I allowed to be?
I don't think there's any bounds right now on
Okay,
things we
well,
need to say.
he has this line that kills me. That's something like, when I like swallowed, or the Nickelodeon shot of cum, or like Nickelodeon slime of cum. I don't know. It was something. There was like he basically mapped it over like Nickelodeon slime, which was a big thing in the early 2000s. And I remember just like, I completely messed that up, but I remember just dying, and I'm like, oh, that's funny. That's funny, but we get it. We know what's happening in the moment sexually, but it's funny. And so trying to like, he really helped me kind of get like, go there and not be scared to talk about sex. And we actually talked on the phone for a long time when I was writing the book about sex, because I was really, really wanting to talk about it, because we don't really see queer women talk about it, do it, and if it's done, it's normally directed by a man. So and so that was something that was really important to me. But yeah, I mean there's loads of book that I've read, but those were definitely the highlights.
Awesome. And I mean, I think that, your book is going to have such a similar impact for folks who read it. I think it's really just a tremendous gift. So thank you so much for writing it, for sharing it with us, for going there, and for being here with us today. It has been wonderful talking to you. And I'm going to drop the book link in the chat just for no reason at all one last time right here. I will also drop it in Slack for folks too. So if you miss this, don't worry, you will still get me dropping this link so you can buy Sophie's book as soon as possible. The One You Want to Marry and Other Identities I've Had. Thank you so much, Sophie, for being here. This was so great.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And thank you for being so kind. And yeah, you're going to put this online later?
Yeah, we'll have it on demand, and I can send you the recording too.
That sounds great. Yeah, make sure to use the two clips. I voted for McCain and I only want hot people on TV. Just make sure to hammer that home.
What's the line? This is how political scandals start. We've got two of them right here. They're brewing. This could be our big press moment right here at Jane.
No, I will say, actually, I did not vote for McCain. I was too young to vote, but I also will say, I do want to be on the record and say that when I was in high school, I wore my Obama shirt. I'm in rural North Alabama. I wore my Obama shirt on election day and walked around proudly while all my friends were like, oh my God, Sophie, you need to get with it. And I was like, no, you need to get with it. And then he won that night. And then I rubbed it in everyone's faces the next day. So
see, the record has been set. This is where there's nothing controversial going on at all.
Or is it? I don't know. Read the book.
Yeah, that's how you'll find out. You click that link, you buy the book. Yeah. You're the only one who'll know.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, thank you so much. And
thank you
have a great rest of your day.
You too.
All right. Bye.
Bye, all.